this will never happen again in history. There will never be a situation where people end a multi-billion-dollar deal off of a tweet.
American exceptionalism might just be the dark, secret, dirty fuel that's the true force behind our global economic and cultural trajectory. It extends right around the world, through America's ubiquity in world news, its dominance in our search results, its wonderful cultural exports.
So it's free, but there's an incentive to return it and not just bring it to your homeless encampment.
Sometimes it feels like everything originates in the United States, that everything cascades out of Washington or Silicon Valley or Austin, Texas. Almost everyone will immediately know what they're looking at here, the hodgepodge of pro-Trump, far-right, would-be Captain Americas who sought to disrupt the vote counts and to pressure VP Mike Pence to overturn the results of the 2020 US presidential election. They did this by storming the legislative branch of the United States government, the Congress, which sits inside the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Some historians are already describing this as a turning point, as an attempted coup even, as a watershed for that exceptional United States democracy, and for the liberal democratic model more broadly. And maybe it will go down in history as all that. But one thing it certainly wasn't was unprecedented. You weren't even close on this one, America, because down here in Australia, we've been doing this shit for decades. This footage is taken from the 1984 film Camera, Diary of a Strike. This film documents how an equally disgruntled group of Left Behinds beat the Stop the Stealers to the punch by 37 years, for eerily similar reasons. The 80s weren't just an unhappy time because Poison and Def Leppard were beginning to top the charts. They were also a very unhappy time for the steel and coal city of Wollongong, New South Wales. Australia's economy was lurching awkwardly into the 21st century, finally expanding beyond the extraction and export of raw materials, becoming a modern service economy, from finance to banking to medical research and to higher education. People were beginning to leave the old Australia behind, an economically protected and culturally undefined world of agriculture, manufacturing and mining. Gough Whitlam had begun a series of tariff reforms in the 1970s in response to high inflation, and his successes on both sides of the aisle had kept on going. By the 1990s, Australia had one of the least protected manufacturing sectors in the world. The boom in GDP that followed this transition is not debatable, nor are the lower prices and higher standard of living experienced by most of the population. But with every large-scale transition, you see people left behind. And against the backdrop of an early 80s recession, 300 BHP miners at the Kemmerer Colliery had just been retrenched. Over 24 workers protested by staying down in the mine for over 2 weeks. But the protest didn't make national news until a far larger number hopped on a train to Canberra, where they stormed the Parliament. This group of 1980s Australian coal miners is obviously separable from the Trump supporters in 2021. They were motivated by a unique bundle of trends, forces and ideologies. But their sentiment was the same. We have been left behind. As for 2021, the sentiment was that the elites in the capital had forgotten them, that they were entitled to a degree of protection from the forces beyond their control, from major industrial and political shifts which had left them jettisoned from the new world forming around them. This protest was met with a level of dignity from the then government.
From inside, and the information that has come through is that Malcolm Fraser is prepared to meet a delegation.
But the retrenchment still came through. The Parliament House excursion still wasn't successful. And neither was Australia's next one, which happened in the subsequent decade and was much bigger.
It was the demonstration that got away. A rally against the government's industrial relations plans, hijacked by union and Aboriginal anger over John Howard's big pre-budget cuts.
12 years later, 1996 was the year that John Howard's Conservative coalition came to power. The new government first introduced a series of public sector cuts in a plan to balance the budget, and then passed the Workplace Relations Amendment Bill, which rebalanced industrial relations in favour of employers, at the expense of workers and unions. Both of these actions upset a lot of people. For the unions, the bill was viewed as an existential threat. They communicated it as such, and mobilised tens of thousands of workers at meetings and rallies across the country. 25,000 ultimately joined the cavalcade to Canberra, far more than the Kemmerer protest, and arrived in the capital on the 19th of August, the day before Howard's first budget. The majority of the unions agreed that the protest should be a peaceful campaign, but a number of contingents, including the CFMEU, a group of Aboriginal rights demonstrators, and a student group, diverged from the plan. The majority of the 25,000 attendees played no part in what followed, which Canberra Times correspondent Ian Warden described as several thousand surging up to the doors of Parliament within spitting distance. They then stormed the building, breaking glass, throwing paint bombs and spilling blood in the foyer, and worst of all, ransacking the parliamentary gift shop, quote, pilfering teaspoons and tea towels. 70 of the 300 riot police holding back the protest were injured, along with a couple of dozen more security staff. "We're coming to get you, Johnny," yelled some of the rioters. The new Treasurer, Peter Costello, was locked down in his office by the police. 49 people were arrested. Howard cancelled his scheduled meeting with the union reps as soon as he saw the damage to the foyer, and the new opposition under Kim Beazley distanced Labor from the protesters too, while half-heartedly noting that they reflected real distress, real public anger at the new government. The whole ordeal was condemned in the media, and it's hard to argue that anything positive came out of the day for the movement, who, thanks to the actions of a few thousand, were condemned unanimously and written off as complete thugs by half the electorate. Another disenfranchised group, another storming of the legislature, and another complete failure. Because as you might have already realised, each of these excursions didn't work. They didn't change the cost-benefit analysis conducted by BHP as to whether or not to keep a coal mine open, and they didn't magically win over a Conservative government to the workers' side of an IR dispute. They didn't stop any steals, and they didn't rescue anybody from any deep states. Now take Tunisia in 2011, Georgia in 2003, Ukraine in 2013. These excursions were a little different. They did do something. They achieved regime change. But they were fundamentally different. They had brought a public buy-in, and they had an explicit goal, which they executed through sheer weight of numbers. A few thousand cookers in the US or Australia are never going to achieve that. Not even close. But that doesn't mean that these events should be ignored, because it doesn't mean that they aren't instructive. They can be a canary in the coal mine. They're a leading indicator that the connections between a state and a society have broken down somewhere. Consider everything that's actually going on now in the United States, and the steady decline in trust that's continued across the liberal democratic world since the turn of the century. Each of these events present a group of people, however big or small, who are increasingly prepared to take risks. Risks because after a successful coup or whatever, there's extreme uncertainty about what will fill the vacuum. This level of risk should only be acceptable when our confidence in prevailing institutions plummets to such a level that we're prepared to rip them out and start all over again. That sounds very fun and sexy and revolutionary, but consider what that would actually mean for your day-to-day life. If you can't, ask an Egyptian after 2011, or an Iranian after 1979. Is this a game we really want to play? And if not, how do we listen to these people, and these people, and these people too, and actually understand what has taken them to the place that they're occupying? It's definitely not by calling them stupid or backward or rednecks or deplorable or racist. That won't work. You can hate these people all you like, but for now, you are stuck with them. So you might as well listen to what they have to say. Be the bigger person if that's how you need to construe it, and take some responsibility to find a way that we can live together in the same country. Because otherwise, we really might as well not have one.